I'd like to show you why knowing your why is the start of your journey. Without a strong why, it can be so difficult to reach your maximum potential. My name is Dr. Jason Ballara, and every week I meet with real estate investors and mindset specialists that are taking action in order to build a life according to their own terms. We will break down what drives successful people and allows them to achieve at such a high level. If you are a professional wanting to break through, or simply someone that wants to hear an inspiring story, the Know Your Why podcast is made for you. Hi everyone, I'm Jason Ballara and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today I'm here with Giang Nguyen. Giang is a seasoned multifamily real estate investor and syndicator, specializing in value-add multifamily rentals. With over 10 years of experience as a scientist, Giang excels in analyzing complex data, employing financial models, and creative problem solving. Incidentally, we also know each other from our a mutual mentorship group. So I am really excited to have you on today, Giang. Thank you so much for taking the time out and coming to share your story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason, for having me. I am so excited to share my story and also just to chat real estate. It's always a fun time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's start with that. Let's start with just kind of hearing your background. Tell people, start wherever you want. Let us know about your journey, and then we'll dive into it, and I'll ask questions.
Yeah, awesome. So as Jason introduced me, my name is Giang. I grew up in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. For anyone who need a reference, it's essentially kind of the New York version of Vietnam. It's a really large city. I'm gonna say a little bit chaotic and always so much things to do. So yeah, very similar to the New York of the US, but maybe a lot hotter, if I could say. But yeah, so I grew up there. I then went to school in Maine, middle of nowhere, Maine. So that was quite an environment switch for me. And I actually went to school for biology in Maine. I went to a small liberal arts college called Bates College. And after graduating from college, I actually moved to Philadelphia, and I was working as a scientist generating gene therapy for a blood disorder called hemophilia A. So I was working as a scientist for almost 10 years before reaching my financial freedom through real estate investing. And so I left my W-2 entirely actually last August to become a full-time real estate investor. And my goal is to help people, especially immigrants, to invest in real estate passively so that they can actually have the time they need to, create memories with their loved one, do whatever it is that they love, and be able to generate, passive income and generational wealth through passive real estate investing. So yeah, that's what I'm up to now in my retirement life, so to speak.
Retirement. I did.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that you're working hard, so it's
Oh yeah.
to call it
Oh
retirement
yeah.
is hysterical.
Funny story. So I was telling my parents, right? I think this is a conversation that I had to have with my parents because for them, they are used to having a W-2 for the rest of their life, right? They work all the way up to closer to 70 when they finally retire. Both of them were teachers and professors, so they are, were place very high value on education. And so for them, the stability, the stable thing, and the safety things to do is to work, to always have a job. Because for them, that is safety to have a job. And so when I was telling them that, like, hey, I am, financially free, I am moving into real estate, I can't tell you how many times I had to have a conversation with them about like, okay, no, mom, I do not want to go to school for pharmacy and become a pharmacist because for them, that is just a safety thing to do. And yeah, so now my mom, talk to my friends and be like, hey, yeah, you should invest in real estate, quit your job because Yang's only works like 2 hours a week. And I'm like, no, mom. Just because I don't have a W-2 means that I only work 2 hours a week. And like, yeah, as you mentioned, now that I'm retired, um, one thing I'm still like switching, learning to balance, right, is now that I am in an entrepreneurship position, how do I balance between how much work do I do? And then how do I balance that with actually, what I invest in real estate for, which is to spend time with my parents, to support them in their retirement, to train as a salsa dancer. So I'm still balancing that. How do I balance how much work I do and then how much I actually live my life, so to speak? But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think that part ever stopped, that balancing act.
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought that up, and we're definitely going to talk about that because that's something that I have had, that sort of transition from a W-2 world to being an entrepreneur is a tricky one. So I would love to talk about that. But first, I just want to back up and kind of talk about, your background and your story. Are your parents here in the US?
Yeah, my parents are now here. They came over a few years ago, and that was very important for me and my sister as they're getting older. I definitely want them to be here so that we could have access to a better healthcare system. And the main reason why I push so hard to grow in real estate was because I actually needed the time and the flexibility to be able to take my parents to see the doctors now that they're getting older and they have some more health issues. So I definitely want to be able to be there for them. And that was the main reason why I push really hard in growing real estate so that I have that financial freedom and that time freedom.
Yeah. Tell us, I mean, you sort of breezed over what got you financial freedom. I know it's real estate, but tell us a little bit about that sort of journey for you. I know, you just left the W-2 in August, but like, when did you start? What did you do to get, I mean, I know we, sort of some of the background from our mentorship group, but tell the listeners, like, how did you start? What path did you take along the way? Because I think, where you're at is a really kind of inspirational point for a lot of people that may be thinking about, sort of getting, whether it's passive or actively involved in real estate. So I'd love to hear kind of how that transition worked for you.
Sure. Yeah, so I started investing in real estate accidentally in 2015. At that point, I was renting, and there was a foreclosure that came on the market just 4 blocks from where I was renting. So now at that point, I didn't know anything about real estate. I didn't even know mortgage existed. I knew nothing. And to be honest, I think because I knew nothing, I wasn't scared of anything, right? Like you can't be scared of what you don't know you're getting yourself into. So I bought that foreclosure, and that foreclosure was vacant for over 20 years. So first property out of the gate, and we have no water, no HVAC, no electricity. And in fact, we actually had foundation issues when there was this over 2-story tree that was growing in the backyard that was growing into this foundation wall. So first property out of the gate, and I got an opportunity to learn a construction 101 crash course, learn as I went along. And so that was a lot of YouTubing, a lot of Googling, a lot of crying, if I'm honest, as I was going along. And back then, I didn't have a community. I didn't know, how I could get support. But that property taught me that I could figure anything out, right? So that was really giving me the confidence that it doesn't matter what was happening, I could figure it out. So from that property, I then went into, now I learn a little bit more. I learned to research a little bit more. And so I went from that property into 2 duplex conversions. So they were single family that I convert into duplex because I was fully believing in the cash flow that I could get in multifamily. And that was very important for me. And then I actually took a pause for a little bit. I wanted to go to medical school. And so I took a pause to real estate and go a little bit more into preparing myself for medical school. And then in the middle of that, my dad got really sick back home and he was hospitalized. So that was a wake up moment for me when I realized that even though as a scientist, I had, to be honest, more flexibility than most jobs, I couldn't quite leave for an extended period of time and go back home and really be there for my parents and to support them the way that I want to. So that was a wake up call for me. And that was a push for me to, really take control of my time. So pandemic happened. I was educating myself a lot on multifamily, and it really clicked that in order to fully replace my income, where I needed to be was the larger multifamily side, where one, I had a bit more cash flow, and two, it is evaluated like a business where it is evaluated based on its income and not based on the sale. So I educate myself a lot, and then just within 7 months, from 2021 to 2022, I scaled my portfolio from that 5 doors to 28 doors, and I was very focused. I was very, very focused because at that point, all I wanted was to be able to replace my income. So I was focusing on a strong cash flow market. I was focusing on multifamily, 5 units or above. And I was very focused on building a team, so that I could actually scale while I was having a full-time job. So I scaled that portfolio quickly, in a strong cash flow market that helped replace my income. And then I move on to syndication. So yeah, that's a long story of how I got to my financial freedom, why I really love multifamily, and how I really believe that multifamily can really help people not only generate that cash flow, but also be able to build that generational wealth through investing in multifamily, whether passively or actively.
Yeah. I know it's not, wasn't a multifamily, but that first foreclosure that you got, I want to talk about it a little bit, because I think you probably just scared a whole bunch of people, which is like, which is why I feel like a lot of people maybe miss the opportunity in real estate. And again, what you did there, you took a big step. It was a learning lesson. There's a lot to be had there as an active real estate investor. But what I think a lot of people don't understand, and what, when we talk about syndication, we talk about the passive investment. What people don't understand is, there are certain people that want to do it that way, right? Like they want to do the flips, they want to do the renovations, they want to, sort of take that 20-year vacant house and turn it around into something beautiful that people will live in. There's other people that don't want to deal with that stuff. And the beauty is, you don't have to, and you can still be involved in real estate. And that's what passive real estate investing is. That's the whole point behind, whether it's a technically a syndication, or it's just, you're a money partner with someone like yourself on a flip like that. So I think it's an important thing to point out, and as you said, for you, I'm sure, in between the tiers, there were a lot of learning lessons. And that's in the active real estate world. I think it's a lot of that, right? I think it's a lot of that until you reach such a scale that you have, as you said, you've built that team, and you've built a really big team where you're just kind of the conductor of the orchestra. You're sort of, you have everybody, pulling those strings for you, and you're just overseeing all of it. But in the beginning, you're involved in the day-to-day, and that's sometimes I feel like some people get into real estate not knowing that, right? Like they say, I want to be active, but don't know just how active is. And that's sort of that's why it's funny that your mom will now say, that you work only 2 hours a week. Like, oh no, I'm 100% sure you probably work more hours now than you did before. It's just not going to an office or a specific, you're not punching a clock.
Yeah, Jason, what you brought up was so important, right? Because one thing I always love to tell people is that real estate is flexible, right?
Yeah.
We love real estate because of its flexibility. Back then, I didn't know, like I mentioned, I didn't know mortgage existed. I didn't know that you could invest passively. right? One thing that was very important for, I think, as an immigrant to understand is as an immigrant, there's a lot of restriction that you can do outside of your time in your W-2. There's a lot of restriction around like whether immigrants can flip because it's considered an active position instead of a passive investment. So there's a lot of almost like legality around whether how immigrants can invest. And that's why I really think it's very important that, you know, I share the message that like, hey, this is available, that you can be in your full-time position and be able to invest passively. Not only in time-wise, but also like legally wise. Of course, everyone consult with your own lawyers, right? But back then, right, like I mentioned, I didn't know any of this existed. I didn't know that I could hand over my money to someone and really leverage their time and leverage their experience and all the years that they have, you know, all the tears that they have spent on learning these lessons, just so that I don't have to do it, right? And I think one very important lesson that you brought up is that choice, right? People can choose how they want to be involved in real estate. What really got them out of bed in the morning, right? Like if you're the person who's like, man, I can't wait to get up and meet my tenants and just like go around, collect rents, whatever that looks right? Or if you're like, hey, I can't wait to start laying down LVP flooring to spend time doing that, like, good for you. Like, absolutely go do that, right? You have an option to do that. But if that person is like, hey, I just rather wake up and take my kids to the beach, like, and just have my money working, there is that option for you as well to invest passively. And that's what I love about real estate. You can really be intentional with how you choose to spend your time and how you choose to have your money work for you. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that community is just great to learn that.
Yeah, I love the word you used, flexible, right? It's like literally anybody can be involved in real estate, and you kind of can be involved in whatever capacity you want to, you know, be as active as you want to, be as passive as you want to. You can pick different asset classes. Like it's hard to go wrong. Like, it's obviously you can do it wrong, or you can, you know, have challenges. It's not easy, but it's very accessible in some way to nearly everyone. I didn't know that there were sort of legal limitations on immigrants being able to invest. Do you mind talking about that a little bit? I'm actually just intrigued. I've never heard that before. So what are you referring to? Like, what are some of those rules? And like, neither of us are CPAs or attorneys or all of the disclaimer things that you need to say. This is truly just a conversation about
just a conversation.
Something that I find fascinating that you mentioned.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I grew up in Vietnam and I came over here for college. So I was under a visa called F1, which is for a student visa. I do think that overall, as an immigrant, there is a lot of restriction. There's a lot of restriction in terms of like how you can borrow money. For example, I think as any active investors, you probably would have heard that one of the most, I'm gonna say advantageous type of loan is to borrow from a credit union, right? Or from a community bank, because they always have the best terms, the best interest rate. Now, one thing that I don't think a lot of people have mentioned is, as an immigrant, a lot of people actually don't lend to people who are neither US citizens or US permanent residents. So as I started out investing, I was under a work visa called an H-1B. And so under an H-1B, there's a lot of restriction on who I can actually borrow money from. And not really from my end, but from the bank side. A lot of credit unions do not lend money out to anyone unless they are a US citizens or they are a permanent resident. And so literally, as I was starting to grow my portfolio, I had to have a conversation with like 25, 30 banks only to find actually certain number of banks who actually would lend to people who are on an H-1B visa. So I do think there's a lot of restrictions set up to, and it makes it a little bit harder for immigrants to actually invest in real estate actively. Certainly there's ways around that. It's just, you just have to have more conversations, you spend more time, and there's just a lot more things. I want to say a lot more hoops that you're going to have to jump through. So at that point, right, like I mentioned, I didn't know that passive investing exists, because for me, at that point, passive investing would remove a lot of these hoops that I have to jump through, right? I don't have to talk to lenders. I don't have to find hard money lenders or even bank, and why still be able to get the best rate. The other thing that I want to mention is for a lot of visa, H-1B specifically, but also other work visas, one of the requirement is that you can only work for your active employer or whoever give you that visa. Again, I am not a lawyer, so of course, always consult your own immigration lawyer. But for a lot of immigrants, or like for me specifically on an H-1B visa, I could invest in rental, but flipping is not advised, at least by my lawyers, because that is considered an actively, I am actively doing something or working in something outside of my W-2. So I couldn't flip, I couldn't wholesale. I obviously could not become a real estate agent. A lot of that was would have violated my terms of my work visa. So I think there's certain that aspect in real estate investing that I think, you need to take into account if you're an immigrant in the US. There's also certainly, right, when I talk to people from back home, a lot of people would like to invest in the US market, but it is challenging to invest when you are abroad. So that's also, who I would love to help is, other people who are outside the US who would like to invest in the US while not physically being here, and, be able to invest with the expertise already in place in that local market. But yeah, there's a lot of, I think, different hoops that you kind of have to consider as an immigrant investing in the US.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know, I've never heard anyone talk about that before. So interesting information. And whatever, I guess nobody cares what I think about these laws and rules, but it seems silly to, limit anyone's, I guess, attempts to build a better life for themselves. So how did you do that when it came to that first foreclosure? How did you find lending for that first foreclosure? I know you said you spoke with a lot of different lenders, or did you get a hard money lender? What was your process?
Yeah, so at that point, again, I did not know anything about lending. So I did not know that so at that point, luckily I came out of college. I went to college with a scholarship. So I went out of college without student loans. So I was saving a lot during my first few years of working. So at that point, I saved enough for a chunk of cash. So that was enough for me to purchase the foreclosure with all cash. And then at a point, my ex and I was doing a lot of sweat equity to rehab the property, learning things along. So that was also really helped with saving with the construction. But all of that was done with cash because I did not know that I could have used a hard money lender. Now, after that, because I was living in the property, I was able to then cash out refinance using a conventional loan. And so that was okay for me to do. I couldn't really hold it in an LLC, and that was essentially under my personal name because it was a conventional loan. So for a while, I couldn't really take advantage of commercial loans because a lot of credit unions and a lot of banks would say no. So all of this, just not to say, I'm not trying to discourage people from investing because I really think that it's very important, especially if you're an immigrant, to invest, because I do think that a lot of, I want to say, share myth that people think is that as immigrant, you cannot own real estate in the US. And I do think that, that's, as a community, we might be missing out on what investing in real estate could help. So yeah, I was using a conventional loan, just a lot of conversations, and then that was so kind of didn't help me grow as quickly because conventional loan, DTI, a lot of that was taken into account. But I think that's just why I'm really excited to be able to share more information about investing as an immigrant, because I really think that it will be really helpful for anyone in growing their passive income and growing their wealth as an immigrant in the US.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. To be a resource for that, in the sense that you can share your experiences, and as you continue to grow and advance in your real estate career, there's just more and more to share. So that's amazing. I know you sort of earlier sort of wrapped up your story with, and now I'm doing syndication, which makes it sound like that's so easy and simple and what, but you want to talk about that a little bit, sort of your transition into syndication?
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned, even though my mom thinks I work 2 hours a week, I now work, I'm gonna say, harder than ever. Not because I have to, but I really want to as a syndicator, because I do feel like, to be honest, I think syndication is a lot more challenging. There's a lot more work to be done. Even though we have a team, even though we have things in place, just taking down something so like larger just require a lot of coordination, a lot of work. So I am now doing a lot more work as a syndicator. To be honest, I do that require a lot more work than my own personal portfolio, because taking down a 5 to 8 units with team in place is much easier compared to taking down a 42, 70 something units, even though we have a team, right? Yeah, so I switched over to become a syndicator. Honestly, mainly because I really want to be able to make this available to other people. Because as I mentioned, as an immigrant, I didn't know that this existed. And I do think for a lot of people, when I talk to, so I work in a hospital, I talk to other scientists, and I talk to other doctors. A lot of people didn't know that they could invest in real estate while literally not having to do anything, right? I feel like when I talk to people, what stopped them from getting into real estate is the time that they think is needed to get into such an asset, or two, the steep learning curve that we all experience as we're going through the real estate world. So as I talked to a lot of my colleagues who didn't understand what is involved, I think that was really a push for me to be like, hey, I really want to make this available for them. I really want to make this available to other immigrants who want to grow wealth in the US. And to be honest, one thing I love about real estate is to be able to work with amazing partners. And syndication is I'm going to say, a sure way that you have to have partners, because like I mentioned, it's a lot of work, a lot of things involved. Yeah. And so one thing I really enjoy being a syndicator is just being able to meet amazing partners that I get to work with, that I get to grow with, and really to push myself to taking down something larger as a team, as a community. So yeah, all those things really attract me to go into that side of real estate investing.
Yeah. And I mean, everything you're saying, as a fellow syndicate, I mean, it all makes sense, right? It's not a do it yourself. I don't think you could possibly DIY a syndication. I mean, I guess if you were, in theory, you could syndicate any size. So maybe technically you could syndicate something very small and kind of be okay doing it yourself. But as you grow in scale, it requires team, whether those are partners or employees, it requires team for sure. Let's talk about leaving the W-2, because I think that this is a thing that very commonly in the real estate space is put out there as this mecca that you at some point you just want to leave your W-2. Like that's the only reason you do this is so important. But I think the interesting thing is one, in saying that, I think you're forgetting some of the advantages of a W-2 in that, yes, you work for someone else, maybe you don't, like, people can argue the stability of that, but also you have, in a way, guaranteed income coming in, right? So what I want to, my point I want to make here is to tell people, like, maybe don't leave it too soon. Maybe don't make it be the singular goal, right? So because it's a challenge on a number of levels. And I think, as you alluded to before, and I want to talk about here, just that transition from a very structured life, which most of us have had forever, like literally, you know, as a child, you start going to school, you know, school is certain days, certain hours, then you go to high school, college, it may be further training if you're, you know, a scientist, a doctor, whatever, people that, you know, go to school for, you have everything structured, then you get a job, they tell you when to be there. And it's like, we say that we don't like that structure, that we don't want to be told what to do, but I don't think that's entirely true. I think some people actually thrive and do better with structure, and figuring out how to create that yourself, at least from my perspective, was the hardest part about moving from a, you know, sort of a W-2 life to an entrepreneurial life. And I'm really interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah, that is such a great point that you brought up. And I want to comment on this from, I guess, different perspective under different roles, right? So you mentioned that a lot of people, let's say, and you totally hit the nails on the head, right? Like, a lot of people think that leaving your W-2 is that ultimate goal, right? That be all and all goal, right? And when I talk to people, what I always want to bring up to is that you invest in real estate so that you have a choice, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's all we want, right? That choice that we can make with our time. If that W-2 is that choice that you want to make, right? If you get out of bed and, like, hey, your W-2 is what's very fulfilling for you, absolutely go for that, right? The only thing that we all advocate for building towards is having that choice of, you know, what it looks like if you do need to make that choice to leave your W-2. Would you be able to do that, right? And I want to share a story. So, like, I was just talking to a lawyer. I was just working with a lawyer the other day, and he was taking just a little bit to get back to me. And, you know, we follow up, like, hey, you know, just want to follow up, see how things are going. And when we hop on a call, he was sharing with us that, like, hey, sorry, I got hospitalized over the weekend, and I thought it was, you know, just an emergency trip, but now it's actually a very serious health issues that I am now essentially shuffling all my workload. And, you know, I'm going to help you guys on this, but, you know, I'm essentially shuffling my workload and no longer doing a lot of things so I can focus on my health, right? Yeah. That decision needed to happen over one weekend. And his whole world changed. And now I do think he's going to be okay. Like, I think he has, you know, his business, and I think, you know, he's going to figure some things out. But I think what I really want to push on people understand is, I think this is why passive income can't wait, because you just don't know what would happen, right? You just don't know exactly when you would need that passive income. And if you wait until you need that passive income to build that passive income, then it's too late. So I think this is very important for people to understand that all we're working towards is a choice to call what we do with that time, whether that's stay in your W-2 and have a real fulfilling career, or just like, hey, I no longer want to work a W-2, or even I just want to work it part-time and have a bit more time freedom of my life, right? I think the choice is all what we're advocating for. And what you mentioned about that structure, it's definitely like something that I'm getting used to, right? I don't think I share this entirely publicly, but about 6 months from after I quit my job, I wanted to go back and have a W-2. And not entirely as a scientist, but I was considering whether, working in a syndication company where what I was really missing is that I was really missing being a part of something much larger than myself. So for me as a syndicator, I have partners, right? But I could be maybe leading a project, or we'll all be splitting as like equal role. But I was really missing being a part of a company, of having like that core team that I go to work daily with. So I was really having a hard time with that transition, because I was working day in, day out with a close-knit team for almost 10 years to like advance gene therapy for blood disorder, right? So I was really missing that mission and missing being a part of something bigger than myself. So, as you mentioned, I think that structure was very important to put into place, and I'm still really figuring that out, right? As an entrepreneur, I feel like we wear many hats, and even when we have support, we're still wearing many hats. So figuring out what the balance look like, figuring out what the structure looks like. And one thing I'm just putting in place is I'm just allowing myself the grace to figure it out, because I don't think any of us would ever be in a position that we're half life completely figure out. So I am just accepting this figuring out piece as part of the journey and just embracing it. And, being part of community, like the community that we're in, being a part of other community, hearing other people's stories and hearing what they're up to, I think has been very helpful, to see like, hey, maybe I can try this, maybe I can try that. And just kind of having kind of a connection with other people. I think that's been what I'm putting to place to help with this transition. But yeah, figuring out as I go.
Yeah. Two things that was, I mean, really everything you said there was amazing. Two things I want to point out specifically, especially to people listening. Go back, rewind this, and start where Yang said passive income can't wait. Or maybe start a minute before that, but listen to that over and over again, because that is like, that might be the most important segment that has ever happened on this podcast. Like the most important set of things that you just said, because it's so true, and like your story is a great one. And this is like in hindsight, or in comparison to that, this is a silly story, but like my daughter, like my kids are like everything to me. My daughter, she was kind of sick over the weekend, had a cough, runny nose, whatever. Not a big deal. They have them all the time. Kids in daycare, they get this stuff. Yesterday, she wouldn't eat and basically couldn't keep her eyes open, and then like threw up all over the place and was like super lethargic. Like if I had a W-2 job that I couldn't have come home or been home when it was happening, like that would have been, it was stressful anyway, but it would have been like dramatically more stressful to myself, to my wife, like because I work home. I have an office at like out in my garage. Like, I find out this is happening, and I dropped everything I was doing, and I'm like, we're taking her to the doctor. Like, if the pediatrician doesn't have an appointment, we'll go to urgent care or whatever. Like, and I thought about it. I thought really about like, there are things like forget like missing, practices, recitals, games, all of that stuff, because you have a schedule that you have to follow. But like health is so much, she has strep throat. Like kids get strep throat. It's not like the end of the world, but to me, like this is the first time she's ever had anything like this. She's not even 2. Like I hadn't seen her like that ever before, and it really stressed me out. And I have I have friends that have had kids with far worse illnesses and things it's this is not like a woe is me. It's to make the point of, I was able to be there. I was able to go to the pediatrician with her and my wife and hold her and all of it. And so it was just like, when I think, there are days that I have had the same thoughts of like, it would be easier just to go back and get a job, right? It would be easier to go back and be as a W-2 employee. In some instances it would be, but the reality is like what this creates for me in terms of my time freedom and also like the financial freedom that's going to grow with time for my family, for my kids' families, for our investors. Like this is like when you start to realize the importance, of the impact that you can have on a larger scale outside of just your own house, even like what you're talking about in terms of, helping immigrants get involved in investing. I have the similar sort of thought process as far as getting veterinarians involved in investing. Like you have that community, and you have found something that sort of stumbled into this arena where you figure out, wait a minute, like I can really help people. Like I can really help people like me, and they don't have to do all the work that I have done or are doing. And like personally for me, I really love the active side of it. I enjoy real estate. I think it's a lot of fun, but at the same time, like 5 years, 10 years down the road, I fully expect to be in a place where I will be able to be 100% passive if that's what I choose. And so it's, we're in the, like, we're investing alongside of our investors, our own money, so that essentially to get to the same place, right? It's like, we'll do the work now, but we all are trying to get to the same thing. So I wanted to highlight those things you just touched on, because I really do think that part about, passive income can't wait. It's such an important point. And I always talk about time, the value of time, but that's exactly a reason why, right? So use time to your advantage. Don't wait on this stuff, and get going somehow. Like find a way to be involved. So I just really loved what you said, and I wanted to kind of reiterate.
Yeah, and Jason, I want to point out something that you were talking about. You were, I love that you were able to be there for your family. And, you mentioned how, like, it wasn't the end of the war. And I think for most people, right, like, it isn't the end of the war until it is, right? Like, and you just never know. Like, you just never know when it is that key moment that you just really can't miss. And so, like, do you want to wait until that it is the key moment and now you're forced to choose something? But also what I want to point out is, you understood that it was strep throat, whatever that was, right? But I can imagine for your kids, like, she was like, they were not feeling great, and it doesn't matter what it was, like, they were just not feeling great. And for them, it's probably like, this feels like the end of the war for them. Like, they were struggling. And so I really appreciate that you were able to be there for them, and was really be able to be there. And, you don't have to choose of like, hey, sorry kid, it's just a strep throat, so you go through it, and be able to be there for your wife throughout all that process. And I think it's very important that we could have that choice to do what needed. One thing I also want to point to is, this is why I love being a syndicator and actually having the right partners on the team. Because for me, for any of my partners, right, what I really stand for is, they have their life, that they need to be able to be there for their family and for whatever they need to do, without having to worry that, like, hey, I'm gonna, this is my part and I'm gonna drop the ball and I just have to, like, do this while, like, not being there for my family. So I think this is why we have the right partners on the team, where, like, hey, I understand you have to be there for your family. Like, please go, please take care of yourself, please take care of your family. We'll pick up your part, and then you can come back whenever that works, right? Like, be able to have partners. And this is why it's also great for our investors to know that, like, because we have a team in place, we can essentially almost manage any of these parts. And even though we have partners, any of us can pick up these part, right? So for them to know like, hey, their money is working, they can take care of their family, they can do whatever they need to do. And we have a system in place where we can take care of whatever is coming up. So I think that like this is when moving to a larger asset is very important key to allow us to be able to have multiple partners, have multiple things in place so that we can function more efficiently. We can actually take down something larger that we can all profit from. And I think this is the beauty of multifamily syndication on the larger scale, going far by going together, right? Like that's always the nice things of syndication.
Yeah, totally agree. I think just great points, Yang. I love this conversation. I don't want to keep you all night long. I want to get to the part where I get to ask you the questions I ask every guest. And certainly we will get to continue talking outside of this podcast, thankfully. But so my first question is always related to the name of the show, being Know Your Why. So what is your why? And I think I probably have a sense for what you might say here, but I want to give you the opportunity to really sort of define it. And I recognize too that it shifts over time. You know, I've had shifts in my own why. I've had guests that have that sort of evolution of their why. So what is your why, Yang? What keeps you going?
Yeah. So my big why is being able to support my parents in their retirement, being able to build a financial legacy for my future family, while still having the time to create memories with my parents and, you know, whenever I have family. So I think for me, I always think of it as, you know, generational wealth is not just for my kids. Generational wealth is, you know, to be able to take care of my parents and actually spend the precious time with them while building that legacy for my future family. So that's one of my big why. And the other big why is allowing people to do the same. So that's why I got into my syndication. And that's what got me out of bed in the morning. And that's what I get to do now. So yeah.
When you're working your 2 hours a week.
Yeah, I'm working only 2 hours a week to get all of this happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Easy peasy, right?
Awesome. Tell us something about yourself that isn't common knowledge. I have something I want to ask you about related to this, but tell us something about just to let listeners know you a little bit better. If you don't pick what I'm thinking of, then I have follow-up questions.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if this is non-common knowledge. I can tell you something that's non-common knowledge later, but also I am a competitive salsa dancer. So I have been dancing since I was a kid. I started with traditional Vietnamese dance, did some jazz, hip hop, and I got into salsa dancing about 5 years ago and got completely hooked. If you guys don't know anything about salsa dancing, highly suggest you guys take a class. It's really fun. And the reason why I really love it is it's essentially like a conversation and it's a language that you're learning. So, you know, I was used to like a choreography world when you learn a certain move and you just repeat the same moves. For salsa dancing, the nice thing about it is it's literally a conversation. It's a lead and follow dance. So you can meet anyone randomly from across the world and you would be able to share a dance or have that conversation. And you could have dance with the same person over and over, but your dance would never be the same. So it's like really fun, spontaneous dancing that and really allows you to connect with completely random stranger in this beautiful dance. So I got really hooked into it. We training for competition every January in Miami. So yeah, it's definitely what I do. The other thing I don't think I will share is I actually in college, I wanted to become a vet. So I actually was shadowing a lot of emergency vet. I was small animal vet. I actually wanted to become a wildlife vet. So I spent a chunk of my college career pursuing that passion, actually. So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I know some wildlife vets. That's
Yeah.
funny. When people hear this and they want to reach out to you, what's the best place?
Mhm. Yeah, they can go to my website, onerivercapital.com, with one spell out, ONE. So that is onerivercapital.com. I am also on Instagram and Facebook under that Salsa Investor, salsa as a dance. But yeah, I am active on Instagram. I'm really happy to chat and connect and to share story. So yeah, feel free to reach out. You will be doing me a favor, as I'm now an entrepreneur and I like don't have interaction with people. Just kidding. I do have interaction with people, but this is why I love connecting and investing as a syndicator, because there is that community aspect. But yeah, happy to chat, happy to connect. And yeah.
Awesome. Final question for you, Yang. What is a piece of advice you would give to someone who is getting started in real estate? And you can, sort of target that towards active or passive investors, whichever you'd like, or both.
I think that one advice I would give is, I would think that you are maybe one conversation, one relationship, one action away from completely changing your life. I really think that it is so hard connecting the dots looking forward. Because and maybe you can share this as well during like as an entrepreneurship, right? Like I feel like sometimes you're doing the action and it almost feel like it's not leading anywhere, and all of a sudden, things just connect and everything just look dramatically different, right?
Yeah.
But it's so hard connecting these dots looking forward, because it's so hard to connect to where it's going. But it makes so much sense looking backward, because you can totally see like, oh yeah, I had this conversation with that person lead me to this person, and then this person lead me to XYZ, right? So I really think that everyone is like one relationship, one conversation, and one action away from completely changing their life. So if you're getting started, whether active or passive investors, go out there and build relationship with active investors, with passive investors, even if you're not thinking that you're going to invest, because when a deal comes through, right, like a lot of 506B, you can only introduce it to people that you already have a relationship with. So these relationships are very important, because like I mentioned, when you need that relationship, it's probably too late to build. So always go out there, build relationship, have conversation, and yeah, you will be in a position with a completely changing your life. And go have conversation with people.
Yeah, it's so true. And I mean, to piggyback off that, I think it has a lot to do with, these conversations you would have, some of those people might turn into your mentors, and that will help you connect those dots, going forward, because you can see, even if nothing else, you see that they did it, right? That you see, okay, I see a life that I want. I see someone who has that life, or something, and so now that there is a path forward to that, and it's just a matter of kind of figuring that out and tying that into however that fits into your own life. So really, really great advice. And Yang, this was phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for sharing your story and all the value that you brought to the listeners.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Jason. I had so much fun chatting, and I can't wait to chat further.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks listening, I know you're going to love this episode. Please like, rate, and review the podcast. That allows us to grow our reach and get more great guests like Yang, and have these phenomenal conversations. So thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
I'd like to show you why knowing your why is the start of your journey. Without a strong why, it can be so difficult to reach your maximum potential. My name is Dr. Jason Ballara, and every week I meet with real estate investors and mindset specialists that are taking action in order to build a life according to their own terms. We will break down what drives successful people and allows them to achieve at such a high level. If you are a professional wanting to break through, or simply someone that wants to hear an inspiring story, the Know Your Why podcast is made for you.